It's among the most well-known fairy tales and is one of the most endearing stories ever told. The story of Cinderella, Little Ash. Elements of the story are instantly recognizable and have been a part of our collective consciousness since childhood. The cruel stepsisters, the fairy godmother who turns a pumpkin into a coach, the glass slipper, Prince Charming who falls in love with Cinderella at first sight, and of course Cinderella herself, the heroine in the quintessential rags to riches story. These images were so richly illustrated in the storybooks of our childhood and then magically brought to life thanks to the medium of animation. And today we are recounting Cinderella's history in animation throughout the 20th century. If you enjoy learning about the animation of the past and the cartoons of your childhood, please subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Disney's 1950 animated feature film is probably the most popular and best known animated adaptation of Cinderella, but the story had already had a long history in animation by the time the movie was released. Having said that, Disney was in fact the first to animate the classic fairy tale, almost 30 years before the animated feature film. Laugh-O-Gram Studio was Walt Disney's very first independent animation company, located in Kansas City, Missouri, where he produced early one-minute satirical newsreel ads and modernized fairy tale silent shorts. The seventh and final of these shorts was Cinderella, released in 1922. The 7-minute short offers a contemporary take on the story, depicting Cinderella as a 1920s flapper, and the role of Cinderella was played by Susie, a recurring character in the Laugh-O-Gram cartoons and Walt Disney's first recurring human cartoon character. The story of Cinderella was featured in another black and white silent cartoon just 3 years later, in the 1925 Mutt and Jeff cartoon entitled A Kick for Cinderella. Mutt heads out one evening to show off his Charleston dance moves at an exhibition, leaving Jeff at home reading the Cinderella story and wishing he could also go out dancing, only for his wish to be granted by the fairy godmother. This was followed by another silent black and white cartoon released in 1931, Cinderella Blues, produced by the Van Buren Corporation. The cartoon retells the classic Cinderella fairy tale, except with cats playing the roles of Cinderella and Prince Charming, and is set to a distinct Jazz Age musical style. Cinderella's first colour appearance came in a Betty Boop cartoon, which ironically was the only Betty Boop cartoon in colour. I'm talking of course about the 1934 classic Poor Cinderella. A condensed but pretty faithful retelling of the story, with Betty Boop playing the main role. Poor Cinderella was made in the 2-strip Cinecolor process, as Walt Disney had exclusive rights to the new 3-strip Technicolor process at the time, and Betty's hair was coloured red to take advantage of this. The cartoon also utilized Fleischer Studios' stereo-optical process in order to provide some scenes with additional depth of field. Tex Avery took on the Cinderella story for the first time in 1938 while working at Warner Brothers. Cinderella Meets Fella was a parody of the fairy tale released as part of the Merry Melody series and featured an early prototype of Elmer Fudd playing the role of Prince Charming. The cartoon ends with self-referential meta-humor in true Avery style. When Prince Charming is eventually able to find her house, Cinderella is not there, and he instead finds a note explaining that she got tired of waiting and instead went to a Warner Brothers show. She then appears from the audience, and the two go to sit together in the 10th row to watch the upcoming newsreel. Tex Avery would return to the story while at MGM Studios in the classic 1945 short Swing Shift Cinderella, which starts off as a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood before the wolf abandons the story in favour of meeting Cinderella, played by Red. Swing Shift Cinderella is another one of Avery's deconstructed fairy tales, with Cinderella giving an infamous performance at a nightclub before leaving at midnight. And the title of the cartoon is a reference to Cinderella being revealed to also be a Rosie the Riveter, working the swing shift in an armament factory during the Second World War. And that brings us to 1950 and Disney's iconic feature film, Cinderella. During the 1940s, Walt Disney Productions had endured a number of commercial failures, such as Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Bambi. And by 1947, the studio was heavily in debt and on the verge of bankruptcy. After producing a string of package films, Walt Disney and his animators returned to feature film production in 1948 with the idea of simultaneously adapting Charles Perrault's Cinderella and Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland into animated films. By the late 1940s, Walt Disney's involvement during production had lessened considerably, and the directors were left to exercise their own judgment more on details. And the animation crews on both Alice and Cinderella would effectively compete against each other to see which film would finish first. As always, we have a lot to get through today, so I don't want to spend too much time on Disney's Cinderella. The film has a very interesting history, so let me know in the comments if you would like to see a video dedicated to the 1950 feature film. In contrast to the negative response to Alice in Wonderland released a year later, Cinderella was a major box office success and was met with universal, critical, and commercial acclaim. The film generated the best reception for a Disney animated film since Dumbo, while many critics considered it Disney's first artistic triumph since Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, released in 1937, praising the film's animation, visuals, music, and story. To this day, Cinderella remains one of the most popular animated feature films in the Disney canon. And more than 50 years later, the film produced two sequels, Cinderella 2, Dreams Come True in 2002, and Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time, released in 2007. Cinderella herself went on to become a legendary Disney icon, one of the original Disney princesses, and several characters from the film have appeared as guests in House of Mouse, Mickey's Magical Christmas, and Mickey's House of Villains. The Cinderella story was spoofed in the 1953 Popeye cartoon Ancient Fistory, which featured a gender-reverse take on the fairy tale. A grand ball is being held in which Princess Olive will choose her husband, and at Bluto's beanery, the owner leaves to go to the ball, leaving all duties to his overworked, raggedy employee, Popeye. A fairy godfather arrives and turns a can of spinach into a car to allow Popeye to also attend the ball, where Princess Olive ignores Bluto and instead turns her attention to the newly arrived Cinderfella. Cinderella was referenced in a number of Hanna-Barbera cartoons, the first coming in the 1959 Snooper and Blabber segment Slippery Glass Slipper, where Detective Blabber recounts his and his partner Snooper's royal case in which they are tasked with finding the lady who owns a glass slipper. While a similar plot could be found in a particularly loopy rendition from the 1962 Loopy de Loop cartoon Slippery Slippers, in which Loopy helps Prince Charming find Cinderella. In 1964, Magilla Gorilla tells a fractured version of the fairy tale to Little O.G., in which the little girl plays the role of Cinderella O.G., while Magilla is the court jester who helps Prince Charming find Cinderella in the Magilla Gorilla segment Prince Charming. That same year, the Flintstones gave us a prehistoric take on the fairy tale in their 5th season episode, Cinderella Stone. Fred Flintstone is hurt by the fact that he is the only employee not invited to his boss, Mr. Slate's party, until he is visited by his fairy godmother, who grants him a night at the ball, which he attends under the guise of being a wealthy and influential investment broker. Cinderella would also appear in the 1965 Winsome Witch episode, How Now Cinderella, in which Winnie Witch recounts to two children the time she met Cinderella on the day of the ball and takes credit for Cinderella and Prince Charming getting married. In between these Hanna-Barbera cartoons, the 1964 Looney Tunes short Cinderella and the Glass Horacha featured a man telling his friend a Mexican version of the Cinderella story, set in Mexico. At the big fiesta, Cinderella and Prince Don Jose tango the night away until Cinderella vamooses at midnight, leaving behind her glass horacha. In 1972, the Rankin Bass fairy tale anthology series Festival of Family Classics employed a straightforward, family-friendly narrative structure suited for children's television programming blocks in their 22-minute adaptation of the story, as seen in the third episode of the series. In 1979, we saw the first of many Japanese anime renditions of the story, the first appearing in the 28th episode of Manga Fairy Tales of the World, broadcast in Japan by TBS on April 14, 1977. This was followed by world-famous fairy tale series produced by Toei Animation, and which retold the Cinderella story in their 13th episode of the series, first broadcast in February 1979. Later that year, a Soviet animated short film entitled Cinderella was produced by the famous Moscow-based studio Soyuz-Multfilm, which brought the classic fairy tale to life with unique Eastern European artistic styling and classical musical arrangements. An English dub of the film was released in 1995 as part of the series Stories from My Childhood, and featured new added dialogues and a new musical score. Cinderella was referenced in the Alvin and the Chipmunks episode Cinderella, Cinderella, first broadcast on February 11, 1986, in which Brittany falls asleep and dreams that she is Cinderella. Later that year, another anime adaptation of Cinderella appeared in the 9th episode of the short-lived My Favorite Fairy Tale series, which comprised of 10-minute OVAs of fairy tales and other classic stories. Grimm's Fairy Tale Classics was a Japanese anime anthology series by Nippon Animation, and the 18th episode told the story of Cinderella, divided into two parts, the first of which aired on March 23, 1988, and the second part aired a week later. That same year, in an episode of Alf Tales, Alf and his friends retell the story of Cinderella, set in 1962, where a young girl named Cinderella Fitzgerald falls in love with the rock legend Gordo Shumway. Funky Fables was an animated segment of the Hiraki Ponkiki children's series, and which adapted various classic stories, including Cinderella, which was first broadcast in Japanese in 1989 and later dubbed into English in 1991. Britannica's Tales Around the World was a direct-to-video animated educational series that was released in 1990, and the second episode retold the classic French version of Cinderella, as well as a Chilean variant known as Maria la Cenicienta, which translates into English as Cinder Maria. Golden Films is an American production company founded in 1989 and which has produced over 90 films, including a variety of animated short films, one of which was a 25-minute adaptation of Cinderella, released in 1990. The Cinderella story was referenced on 3 different occasions in Garfield and Friends, first in the 3rd season episode entitled Cinderella Cat, in which Garfield finds a lost copy of the Cinderella story, wishes for a fairy godmother, and instead gets a chaotic fairy godfather, spoofing Vito Corleone, who grants him unusual wishes. The next came in the 4th season segment of US Acres entitled Bedtime Story Blues, in which Orson reads the classic fairy tale as a bedtime story to Booker and Sheldon. And the story was referenced again in the 7th season of Garfield and Friends in an episode entitled The Fairy Dogmother, which introduced Esmeralda, a clumsy fairy godmother in training assigned to grant Odie's wish to attend the secret Hound Dog Harvest Ball. Jetlag Productions was an American animation studio famous for its direct-to-video adaptations of classic children's stories and fairy tales, distributed by Good Times Entertainment. And in 1994, the studio released a particularly memorable and well-loved 45-minute adaptation of Cinderella. World Fairy Tale Series was an Italian-Japanese animated anthology series based on fairy tales and classic stories, produced by Toei Animation, Fuji 8, and Rete Italia, and the second episode retold the story of Cinderella, premiering on 14th of April 1995. This was followed by an episode of Happily Ever After, Fairy Tales for Every Child, an American musical anthology animated television series that premiered on HBO in March 1995, and each episode retold a classic story in different cultural settings with multi-ethnic characters. And the 10th episode, which premiered on May 14th, 1995, gave the Cinderella story an Hispanic twist, featuring the voice of Daphne Zuniga as Cinderella, and even Raquel Welch as La Madrastra, the evil stepmother. Burbank Animation Studios released an animated version of Cinderella in 1996, a straight-to-video film which ran for almost 50 minutes as a modest adaptation of the classic fairy tale. We'll end this list with a very special entry. Cinderella Monogatari, the story of Cinderella, was a Japanese anime television series based on the Cinderella fairy tale, produced by Tatsunoko Production. The series originally aired from April 4th to October 3rd, 1996, comprising of 26 episodes in total, and offered an expanded version of the original tale, covering Cinderella's trials and tribulations as she tries to adapt to a new life. Cinderella Monogatari also added new characters and new subplots, including one about a greedy duke trying to usurp the throne. Cindy would of course go on to make many more animated appearances in the 21st century. That's a video for another time, but in the meantime, maybe you can help me out by letting me know in the comments which other appearances of hers in 21st century animation that you remember. We looked at a lot of appearances of Cinderella in animation today, so please let us all know which of them were your favorites. I also tried to make this list as comprehensive as possible, so please do let me know in the comments if there were other appearances in the 20th century that I left out. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Please like this video if you learned something today, and remember to share this video with anyone you know who remembers the Cinderella story from their childhood, which is everyone. I'll be back again soon, so until then, stay safe, stay magical, and stay tuned for more cartoon history.